so that you can benefit even those who are there. So I was saying, our unit title is Public Procurement. I said this is the unit that is going to be guided by the PPDA Act, that is Public Procurement Asset and Disposal Act 2015, which we said is our universal constitution that guides us on some of the regulation procedures that we are going to implement in purchasing. Also going to be guiding us on the procurement methods that we shall be using, the various procurement methods that we shall be using. And then I also said we had to start with the historical evolution, or what we call legal regulatory framework of public procurement system in Kenya. And I said we talk about the historical evolution. And I said, or I divided the history of public procurement into several stages. I said we have the first one, which is the colonial period. The colonial period, we said, talks much about the crown agents, and we say the crown agents were the colonial masters who are doing the overall procurement on behalf of the government. We say during the colonial era, we also had, in 1955, we also had the establishment of the Central Tender Committee, which was the main body mandated with the procurement of all government tenders that were from other countries, that is overseas procurement. We also said during the colonial era in 1959, I'm just giving a recap. In 1959, there was the formation of Procurement and Supplies Unit, which was established initially under the Ministry of Public Works. In 1960, this Procurement and Supply Unit was later called the Supplies Branch. I think that is something that we noted in colonial period. We also talked about the period between 1963 to 1973. And we said what is alive in this period is the period when we got our independence and when we got our first president of Kenya until when he died back in 1978. What happened during that period? We are seeing the colonial masters continuing with their work of purchasing on behalf of the government. We are seeing a little bit of change where we have now the Central Tender Board migrating from the Ministry of Public Works to the Ministry of Finance, that is Treasury. We are also seeing the composition of the Central Tender Board now including staff, the supply staff. We also seen the introduction of supplies manual back in 1978. We have also seen the issue of many circulars, some which superseded others with a very high rate. We also seen circulars emanating from the Ministry of Public Works and other emanating from the President, the Office of the President, and we are seeing a confusion in this era where the different circulars contained different procedures explaining differently on the way you are supposed to procure some items. We went back. I think that's where we reached. Someone can confirm? That's where we reached. I want to continue. I think we reached the period between 1963 to the period between 1978. 1963, 1978. That is the period we are calling the post. Post means after colonialism, post-colonial period, 1963 to 1978. So just a repetition, I'm saying some things that are coming clearly is that, number one, during that period, we are seeing very many circulars, and I said circulars are things like letters or document explaining how the procedure we are supposed to use in purchasing. So we are seeing a circular coming from the Ministry of Public Works telling us that you're supposed to use this methodology to purchase maybe a tractor. another circular, which is very different from the first one, coming from the office of the president, telling us we are supposed to purchase a tractor using another procedure. Another one emanating from the Ministry of Finance, that is the Treasury, telling us differently of the procedure that you're supposed to use to purchase a tractor. So by the end of the day, we are seeing a lot of confusion. And this confusion, of course, attracted a lot of corruption because people had to take advantage of that. So we are saying in 1978, there was an introduction of the supplies manual, and the supplies manual was meant to guide procurement officers or guys in procurement on the way they are supposed to be procuring or they're supposed to be purchasing. So these are some of the things that are coming out. So I'm saying now we go to the next stage, which is era of World Bank reforms. That is the next stage or the next era. In the era of World Bank reform, whatever we are seeing, and why we call it era of World Bank reform, the World Bank is coming, and in here, the World Bank was there before and was giving government money or was funding projects in Kenya through the government. Now, it reached somewhere and it had to ask itself, however much we are giving so much money to the government, we are not seeing the project they are doing. So they realized a lot of money were being stolen, a lot of money were being frauded, the money that they were funding or giving the government of Kenya. So therefore, they had to do a thorough research before they continue funding projects in Kenya. And that is why we are referring to it at this stage. That is the period between 1978 to the period 2001. I repeat again, the period between 1978 to 2001. We are referring to that period, era of World Bank reform. So we are finding the World Bank doing a thorough research, and after doing some research, it identified the following weaknesses in the public procurement of Kenya. What are some of the weaknesses? Number one, they identified reduced effectiveness of public financial management. They realized that Kenyans and the government in general were never keeping documents, were never keeping receipts of the transaction that they were doing in purchasing. This was dangerous because this was the source of corruption. They realized money was not being accounted efficiently. They realized no one was answerable to the money. They realized there was no supreme budgets and procurement plans at that particular time. So this was dangerous because this was the start of money embezzlement. Another weakness that they identified government inability to deliver services effectively. A trend that sometimes I think has continued up to now. Ladies and gentlemen, if you visit a government office today, you realize these guys, they don't act strictly on you. They don't have the better. They don't have good customer service. They report at work at 9, go for lunch at midday, that is 12. They come back to the office at 3, they leave at 4. I think that has been the most phenomenal in government offices. So that is one of the revealed weaknesses of the World Bank. They realized that services by the public servants were so poor. Another thing that they realized obscure rules that were not based on fair competition and transparency. Obscure rules that were not based on fair competition and transparency. What are these obscure rules? They realized there is no legal framework. They realized that the kind of rules that were there did not promote any fairness, did not promote any equity, did not promote any transparency. And therefore, the government needed to amend most of these rules because still these rules attracted a lot of favorism, attracted a lot of discrimination, attracted a lot of corruption. Another weakness they realized there was no legal framework to enforce procurement rules. They realized at that particular time we did not have whatever we are calling Public Procurement Asset and Disposal Act. There was no act by then. The act came later off. They realized there were no legal regulations. There was no any constitution that was guiding procurement guys. And therefore, even if you could have stolen any money in any public entity, you could not be jailed. Because, of course, there was no any constitution that could accuse you on the same. Another weakness, they realized a lot of corruption and thievery of public money. A lot of corruption and thievery of public money. I think almost everyone was stealing by or through relatives, by making sure that you give tenders to your relatives, stealing by making sure you obscure the rules because there's no way where you could be taken. They also revealed that there was no penalties for the culprits of corruption. Ukiiba hauko unapelekwa mahali. There was nowhere you are taken. You could have gone court-free. So these are some of the weaknesses that they identified. So therefore, it's at this particular period that we find the guys, and I know you know these guys, the people Akina Nyachae, I think those were the eras. Nyachae was in the Ministry of Public Works. And I'm very sure they got rich out of these procurement activities. Akina Raira, I think they were dominating by them. We had supreme guys in the government. I think that's why they got their wealth, because they were able to steal at that particular period without being caught or without being punished. So they abused our government system. So we find at this particular time, someone who was highly involved in procurement, that is Nyachae, wrote even a blue book, a kind of guideline, a book we call the Blue Book. And this blue book was talking about how procurement should be regulated, because he has identified some very many loopholes, and especially in our procurement system, and therefore we needed to adjust. That is all in the era of World Bank reform. So we are finding very many weaknesses in the public procurement system in Kenya. And these weaknesses were revealed by the World Bank. That is what we are seeing. So we continue with the next stage, that is era of public procurement reform. In fact, we call it era of reform. That is the period between 2001 to 2010. This is where we usually say procurement came in Kenya. In fact, I tell my students that if you ever hear someone telling you that he did procurement there before 2005, my friend, that particular person did not do procurement. That was not procurement. Procurement has started in the centuries. That is in the year 2001, and currently it's a new course. It's a course that people had not appreciated in there before. So we shall find why we call it era of reform. It has very many changes. There are very many things that we are witnessing that are going to be causing great impact to the strides of the evolution of public procurement. This include in 2001, and sometimes this phase we call it the golden era stage, because it is the stage that you are witnessing very many changes. In 2001, there was, number one, enactment of the Exchequer and Audit Regulation 2001. I repeat again, I know it's a new term. Enactment of the Exchequer. You shall find these terms in your notes. Enactment of the Exchequer and Audit Regulation 2001. For the first time, we are seeing rules coming in. Because, of course, remember the World Bank identified some weaknesses, and therefore we don't have a choice, but we have to improve. And one of the improvement is by coming up with rules and regulation. So what is this exchequer? Exchequer is a consolidated account that is held by the treasury. And this account is meant to keep all government revenues. And it's not easy to remove money from the exchequer. We must get the authority of the auditor. So we find that now we are coming up with rules that are governing us on the way we are supposed to use money. That is money from the government. There is a procedure that if you have to remove money, you have to undergo the following or some several stages. That is the work of the exchequer. So this rule is telling us, is guiding us, even on the way we are supposed to regulate money from the government. And this money include, of course, money for procuring, money that has been donated, money that has been given for grant, and others. So in this particular period, there were some major changes. Like, for example, the Central Tender Board that we have been talking about was abolished. And for the first time, we came up with the Public Procurement Directorate and also the Public Procurement Appeals Board. We have, for the first time, Public Procurement Directorate and the Public Procurement Appeals Board. The work of Public Procurement Directorate was to oversee all procurement activities in our country. The work of Public Procurement Appeals Board was to listen to any dispute arising out of procurement activities. That is, either you have offended the supplier or either the supplier has offended you. So where you could have taken the conflict or the dispute to is the Public Procurement Appeals Board. So you must know that the Central Tender Board is now over and it's being replaced by what? Public Procurement Directorate and the Public Procurement Appeals Board. The chairman of the tender committee, for the first time, were to come from the private sectors, corporations and parastatals. It's not compulsory. You remember the chairman of the Central Tender Board were the colonial masters, but this time we are replacing them. We are saying they can come from private sectors, they can come from corporations, they can come from parastatals. It was also mandatory that each public procurement entity, any government entity, was to establish a procuring entity. Any government institution, it was made compulsory that it must have a procurement department. And that is where we got our jobs. That is back in 2001. Now, and I know you guys have noted, there is no any single public entity, there is no any single government institution that can operate without procuring department. Because this is the high time we realized that procurement department or procurement guys are so important to an extent that they cannot, or an organization cannot learn without them. During this period, that is back in 2001, we are seeing all those changes. In 2005, my dear friends, we had the first act. Remember, one of the weaknesses of the World Bank was there was no legal framework that was guiding procurement. But now, in 2005, and that is why we are calling this stage the era of reform, we are coming up with the first act, 2005. That was when the first act was made. And this act was not called the same as we call it now. This act was called Public Procurement and Disposal Act. We are currently using an act that we are calling Public Procurement Asset. The term asset was not there before. In 2005, we did not have asset. It was called Public Procurement and Disposal Act. But nowadays we have Public Procurement Asset and Disposal Act, 2015. But the previous one was 2005. So this act was approved and gazetted in 2005, but it did not become functional. At that particular time, the finance minister At that particular time, the finance minister was the current president of Kenya. You know him, Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta was the finance minister by then. What he did, he had to wait for the implementation, for the rules to be made. It's like we have the act, but the act must be operationalized by the rules and regulation. It cannot operate without rules. Because if the act is telling us that we should be using the foreign procedure in purchasing, and then there is no rule that is telling you that if you skip any of the process, then it is long, then automatically the act becomes fake. So we had to wait for 2006, where now what we call the public procurement and disposal regulation were made. So of course the act was made in 2005, but it did not become operational until 2006, when rules and regulations were made, and the act now henceforth became operational. That is something that I want you to understand. During this era, you remember we have talked 2001, ladies and gentlemen, we are saying we have the formation of the exchequer system, or what we call the exchequer rules and regulations. The first rules were formed in 2001, but the first act is coming in 2005. We also have several other reforms in this particular era. What else? In 2007, there was also the formation of the Public-Private Partnership Act. Why? It is because the government realized that it did not have enough money to continue doing its project. It needed the private sector to fund it, and that is now the emanation of our tender. What do we do with tender? Ladies and gentlemen, if I get a tender today from the government, I use my money. If I get a tender to tarmac a road, I would use my money, I tarmac the road, I finish, and the government comes and inspects the road. After they will pay me together with the interest. And that is how we gain, we guys in procurement. And it's not compulsory that I must be having my money. I can go to a bank, the bank is going to fund me with a small interest, and then after funding me with a small interest, I'm going to do the work, and then I'm going to be paid later by the government. Now, that is when public-private PPP, public-private partnership, was formed in 2007, and it was meant to obtain a correlation, a collusion between the public and private. The government realized that it cannot operate without private entities, and therefore it really incorporated them in their decision making, in being given, and that is why you can see that any person can get a tender from the government. The government realized that it cannot operate individually. So we are seeing that change. That is back in 2007. There's also another change that did happen during this particular era. In 2007 still, there was also the establishment of the Supply Management Practitioners Act. And the work of the Supplies Management Practitioners Act was to explain and tell procurement officers of the way they are supposed to behave. This is the act that carries the ethics of how the procurement guys are supposed to behave. They were being told, number one, that you guys, you are unique guys, and therefore corruption should not be bit of you. So it advises or it controls guys in procurement that for you to practice procurement today, ladies and gentlemen, you need to be, number one, very transparent in whatever you are doing. You need to disclose all whatever you are doing. You need not to have what we call conflict of interest. You need not to favor anyone. You need to practice what we call fairness. That is what they are saying. You need to be ethical in all your dealings. You need not to employ any relative. You need not to practice nepotism. You need not to practice racism. You need to act professionally in a manner that your image is going to be reputed. That is what you are saying with this. So you are finding, of course, these things increasing. So it is under Supplies Management Practitioners Act that we find the formation of the first institution that regulates procurement in Kenya. That is KISIM, which means Kenya Institute of Supplies Management Professionals. That is KISIM. The one we always tell people, at least you must be a member. If you are in procurement, if you want to be called a procurement officer, if you want to be called a procurement manager, you must be a member. It's mandatory in our country that you must be a member. And it is the body that licenses you to practice in procurement. So whether you want it or not, you must understand that it's not an exemption. It's compulsory that you must be a member if at all you continue studying procurement. So that's why I do encourage people to start doing some of the KISIM exams, to be members of KISIM, because it's a requirement. In fact, even when you're looking for a job at this particular age, if you visit in a newspaper, they will ask you, are you a member of KISIM? Because KISIM has power to blacklist you in case you are corrupt. It has power to screen you. So they really want to know whether you're a member of KISIM or not. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, we call that stage, that era of reform. We have several things that have happened. We go to the next stage, that is 2010. I defined it 2010 to 2013. There are some things that did happen during that particular period. 2010, remember, that is when our new constitution was promulgated. And that is why we usually say it's a grievous, it's a good stage, it's something good that did happen, and especially in procurement. Because the constitution came with something for procurement. It came, number one, outlined all principles and tenets that procurement officers should practice. What did it say? It explained the principles and said that for you to practice procurement, you must be fair, you must practice equitability, you must make sure everyone to be equal, you must practice transparency, you must practice, or you must be competitive, that's fairness, you must be cost effective, or what you call value for money, you must practice probity, you must practice honesty, you must be accountable. There are very many things that are stated in the Constitution. I think Article 96 of the Constitution. If you go to the Constitution, Article 96, it explains how procurement guys are supposed to behave. The Constitution also came up with some goodies for us in procurement. It is said that some people within our country should be treated with some special preferences and reservation. So it is therefore explained and said some particular local companies should be given a reservation. They should be given tenders by the government. The government should favor particular or local companies more than favoring foreign companies. The government also, in the Constitution, explained that, of course, the government should cater for a particular portion of the government tenders to go for the disadvantaged groups. And the disadvantaged group this time, they outline them as the youth. So you guys should know that 30% of all government tenders belong to the youth, women, and the disabled. So we have some particular reservation now that, and this is something that now I'm enlightening you on, because I know it's not compulsory, it's not mandatory that you guys in procurement that we must finish and go search for jobs. There are some who are going to opt to deal with tendering. You look for tenders, you supply, and you get a lot of money. I have evidence of guys who are millionaires, and in fact, almost everyone who has ever dealt with tenders is not a simple puzzle, because you can supply one tender and you get 1 million as profit. So it's just an easy way, and especially guys who are procurement oriented. So I have said we have, of course, some preference and reservation that were brought up by the new constitution. And some of the target groups included small enterprises. Of course, the government catered or had some special preferences or privileges for the small enterprises, micro enterprises, the disadvantaged groups, the citizen contractors, local contractors, citizen contractors with joint venture with foreign contractors. These were some of the people who were favored. And lastly, the last era that I talk about is the era of county government. We call it the era of devolution. When did Kenya become devolved? Back in 2013. And that is why we have it as era of devolution. That is back in 2013. What happened? Now, that is when county governments were formed. Now, I know you may be asking yourself a question. Did they make their own rules, or they copied the rules of the national government? Now, in the county government, one of the requirements is that procurement was trickled down. Procurement was trickled down. The county government had to share a national cake. They get a certain percentage of the revenue that has been collected nationally, and they are shared. And then, of course, they were made mandatory that they must be having a department of procurement. There is no any county government you can visit, ladies and gentlemen, and lack a procurement department, because they realized that procurement department is very key. If you want to get a tender of constructing any road in your area, you just have to go to the county government in the office of procurement or supply chain. If you want to get any tender, maybe tender for constructing a building or anything, you just have to go to the county government in the office of procurement. These guys are supreme. So therefore, we find that in the era of devolution, we find procurement being trickled down to the county government. Now it's no longer there in the central government. It has been trickled down, and all regulation, all rules that were being used in the national government were now trickled down to be used by the county government. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, public procurement in Kenya has come a long way, beginning from the colonial period, through the post-colonial period, through the era of World Bank reform, through the era of reforms, or the golden era, through the era of the new constitution, and lastly, through the era of devolution. If you compare public procurement in there before and today, you witness very serious changes. These changes are the changes that make us to be proud of our procurement profession. A profession that is new in the market, a profession that many think that is marked with corruption, but we say in procurement is a profession that has so much pay, a profession that is motivated by a lot of money, a profession that everyone has to be in, a profession that is tempting because of the large stake of money that we get involved in. Because we say in procurement that anything that comes in the organization as revenue must go out of the organization through us. The reason why? It's because all the money, again, that was the end of our first topic, that's the history of public procurement in Kenya. Thank you. I now go back to the interactive session. I will allow you to use the public chat because of the echo, and I will be answering any question. You will type any question. Jefferson, I can see your question. I'm now ready to answer. If you have any clarity that you want to know, also ask in the public chat. I will not unmute your mic because of the echo. So allow us to interact with the private chat. I will be answering you as I'm speaking. Like for example, Jefferson, you have asked, what is the exchequer? And I'm repeating and telling you, the exchequer is an account that is kept by the Ministry of Finance, more specific the Treasury, and it contains all the revenue that has been collected in the country. That is the exchequer account. So what is exchequer? Exchequer refers to the rules and regulation that governs revenue and expenditure. So any money that enters in the organization, any money that is given to the procurement guys must be accounted to. Any money that comes out from the procurement guys must be accounted to. And that is now the exchequer. That is what you are referring to, the exchequer regulations. Because in there before we did not have regulation that were governing how procurement should be using money. Thank you. I can see Muleho as the public-private partnership in the economy of Kenya. That's a good question. I'll answer it. Remember, whatever I said by public-private partnership that was established back in 2007. I said the government realized that it cannot operate without private sectors, and therefore it had to incorporate them so that they can assist in funding most of the project of the government. Now, Moleho is asking, what is the importance of public-private partnership? So one supreme importance, and the major one, is that we find the private sectors coming to provide the government with money. So the government did not have enough money, and that is why it's going for private sectors. So, of course, private sectors are like now the financiers of government projects. That is number one. Number two, another importance of public-private partnership. The government is able to get ideas from the private partnership through the collaboration. So we are able to exchange ideas. We are able to partner and exchange ideas. Another one, we are able to jointly solve problems. You know, the government might be having problems, but the private sectors can assist by jointly coming up with solutions that are going to help it solve problems. That is another serious advantage or another serious importance of public-private partnership. We find, of course, the private sector steering the wheel of innovation. Private sector steering the wheel of innovation. So therefore, the ideas that the private sectors are coming up with are going to help the government in simplifying its operations. Like for example, if I can give you an example, last year the government gave Safaricom a tender to install CCTV within the CBD, within the Nairobi CBD, Nairobi town. That is the CBD, Central Business District. And why did the government give Safaricom? They realized that Safaricom had the potential through their network to install all those CCTVs so that we can increase on our security surveillance. Security is part of the government, but now it had to look for a better company that it can. So Safaricom had to, and it was worth around 15 billion, which is a good deal. So I think I have been able to answer your question, Muleho. Any other question from any member? You can type it in the public chat. Any other question? Mark? Bishar? I am waiting for your question, Okema. Irene? Kevin, you have any question? Elizabeth, you have any question? Anyone else with a question? Sylvia, you have a question? Mutoro Kisa, you have a question? Michael, Medrin, Mark, anyone with a question to type it there? Why did it take long for procurement reformations to happen? Okay, but you're trying to trick me because that is the question that I asked in the discussion forum last time. And I want you to answer me with a question. I will look at your contribution, but of course, you shall realize that Kenya was a colony of Britain. Maybe to help you now get the answer, Kenya was a colony of Britain, and therefore the colonial masters used to exploit us. In fact, they used to take Kenya as a cheap source of labor, a cheap source of raw materials. What they used to do, and that is why we took so much long to evolve or to reform, what the colonial masters, that is the British, what they used to do, they used to wait for us to grow raw materials. We grow sugarcane, but instead of processing it in our own companies in Kenya, they used to take it to Britain, to UK. They manufacture it now to sugarcane, and then they pack it, and then they come and sell to us very expensively. And yet, they had bought raw materials very cheaply in our country. So that is one major reason why it took long for us to, or for procurement to reform in our country. Another reason why it took long for procurement to reform in our country is because, of course, procurement in there before was not taken as a very serious issue. Anyone could have purchased. But they later came to realize that not everyone can purchase. They later came to realize that procurement is so much important into the organization. And how is it important? They realized that procurement can make a lot of money through saving. It is through our negotiation that we are able to reduce the price of some particular materials that we are being provided by the suppliers. And therefore, that helps, that can be converted into a saving, that can be converted into profit. They realize for the organization to thrive, for the organization to perform well, then it needs to take procurement. So that is why back in now in 2001, we are seeing now procurement being taught in the syllabus. In fact, in 2001, the government had to force anyone doing procurement to go back to school and at least do anything to do with procurement. And that is mandatory. That is why we are seeing very many. In fact, we did not have procurement in universities. And I'm very sure up to now, there are only very few universities which teach procurement. That is why you ended up learning in ZTech, because there is procurement. I think we have ZTech, we have African Nazarene, we have JQuat. I'm talking of pure procurement. If you go to a university like UM, unless you do Bachelor of Business Administration procurement option, there is no pure procurement. I think the time they are trying to make it pure. If you go to more, I think you just have to do Bachelor of Business Management procurement. So procurement is now being recognized afresh as very good. So I think if there's no question, I'm seeing almost everyone saying, Michael, I can't see your comment. If there's no any question from almost all of you, then I would beg us to stop our lesson or to end our lesson from there. In case you need more clarification, I think you shall find this video in your unit, on the homepage of your unit. You are also supposed to visit the homepage. I want to clarify something that I found that you guys are not taking seriously, and that is the discussion forums and the chats. Remember, you're supposed to have a 3 hours interaction. Our session is normal, but this time is only that is through technology. So you're supposed to, when you finish here, you're supposed to go to the discussion forum, look at whatever I have posted there. I must have posted a question. Ensure you contribute. I'm also going to mark your attendance. Check whether your attendance has been marked after like 10 minutes. I'm going to be through with marking your attendance. Confirm also whether there is any assignment, any cut. Make sure you be contributing or be doing them on time. Yes, let's not be like any other institution. Let's continue studying. We are not going to waste any time. There is no any much difference between the normal class and whatever I'm doing. I think you guys can bear me witness. Jefferson, I'm waiting for you to ask any question as I'm finalizing my lessons. So in case you have any comment, in case you have any problem, kindly you can contact us. The only difference is that we are not able to interact physically because of Corona, but I'm very sure if you want us to see each other, you can share your screen. I can be able to see you. You can be able to see any other person. Jefferson is asking me in mother tongue. I will read the way it is. Na kama mtu amechelewa discussion forum anaweza rudi kubona ni ati cause MBs ni tricky kiasi. I know the institution promised to give you some particular MBs. I don't know whether they have been trickled down. I know it's a challenge. Also, that is why you are seeing me. I think the last time I communicated with you, I think the internet got lost. That is why I first post. But I know we shall make it. Whatever we just have to do, make sure you contribute, even if not that particular time, although I'm marking it that particular time because it's contributing in my attendance. So ensure you make sure, by making sure, because I think it is given marks, it has its own marks. Make sure, however much internet is tricky, I think we are in a modern world. We should not be having such tests, and especially in IT. Hai sidhani kama WhatsApp status napatanga umepost status 8 kwa siku ya kuchangia hiyo kitu ndio utashindwa. You can see like someone like Simon is joining this time. Some people are solid, but anyway, I know we shall catch up. Thank you. I end my lesson from there. Let's go to the discussion group, discussion forum. There are some questions there, and I'm also posting a chat. Ensure you chat also there.